In a quiet little neighborhood where every house looked almost the same, there was one thing that stood out: a grand old oak tree. This wasn't just any tree. It had been standing tall for over 100 years, watching generations grow up beneath its sprawling branches. Its thick trunk and wide canopy made it the heart of the community, or at least for Sam Gardner, who lived in the house right next to it. Sam loved that tree more than anything else in his yard. He remembered climbing its strong branches as a boy, feeling like he was on top of the world when he reached the highest point. As he grew older, the tree became even more special. When his kids were born, Sam built them a small wooden swing that hung from one of the lower branches. Every summer evening you could hear laughter echoing through the air as his children swung back and forth, their feet brushing against the soft grass below. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared Sam's fondness for the tree. Karen Phillips, a woman known for her sharp tongue and obsession with rules, hated it. She lived 2 houses down, and while most people didn't pay much attention to her quirks, her disdain for the oak was impossible to ignore. Karen prided herself on having the perfect yard: manicured lawns, colorful flower beds, and not a single leaf out of place. To her, the oak tree was nothing but a nuisance. Karen complained constantly about how the tree blocked sunlight from reaching her precious flowers. "They're wilting because of that monstrous thing," she'd say to anyone who would listen. And then there were the leaves. Oh, how she loathed those leaves. Every autumn they drifted onto her driveway and sidewalk, forcing her to spend hours raking them up. Even in spring, tiny bits of bark and twigs would fall into her garden, ruining her carefully planned arrangements. Karen wasn't shy about voicing her grievances either. At neighborhood gatherings, she cornered whoever she could, listing all the reasons why the tree needed to go. Some neighbors nodded politely, trying to avoid conflict, while others changed the subject quickly. But Karen wasn't satisfied with polite nods or awkward silences. She wanted action. Her frustration eventually led her to the Homeowners Association, HOA, a group responsible for maintaining order in the neighborhood. Armed with photos of her flower beds covered in leaves and a detailed list of complaints, Karen marched into the HOA's monthly meeting determined to make her case. The board members listened patiently as she argued that the tree posed a safety hazard. "What if a branch falls during a storm?" she demanded. "Someone could get hurt." Sam, hearing about the meeting, decided to attend too. He couldn't let Karen win without putting up a fight. When it was his turn to speak, Sam stood up and talked passionately about the tree's importance. "This oak has been here longer than any of us," he said. "It gives us shade in the summer, provides a home for birds and squirrels, and adds character to our neighborhood. Cutting it down would be a mistake." The room fell silent after Sam finished speaking. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, appreciating his heartfelt words. Others remained neutral, unsure of what to think. Karen, however, wasn't swayed. She countered Sam's arguments with accusations of her own, claiming the tree's roots were damaging sidewalks and driveways. Though no evidence supported her claims, her persistence began to wear on the HOA board. As weeks turned into months, Karen continued her campaign against the tree. She circulated petitions, knocked on doors, and even wrote letters to local newspapers, painting herself as a victim of nature's chaos. Slowly but surely, she gained traction. More neighbors started agreeing with her, either because they genuinely believed her concerns or simply wanted to avoid further drama. Despite Sam's best efforts to save the tree, the HOA finally made its decision. The oak had to go. It was a crushing blow for Sam and his family. They felt powerless, knowing that the rules of the association outweighed their personal attachment to the tree. On the day the verdict was announced, Sam went outside and sat under the oak's shade for a long time, silently thanking it for all the memories it had given them. News of the ruling spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. While some residents were relieved that Karen's relentless crusade was finally over, others felt uneasy. A few neighbors approached Sam to express their sympathy, but most stayed quiet, unwilling to challenge the HOA's authority. As for Karen, she celebrated her victory privately, imagining how beautiful her yard would look once the tree was gone. Little did anyone know this decision would set off a chain of events that no one, not even Karen could have predicted. For now, though, life in the neighborhood carried on as usual, with only whispers of dissent lingering in the air. The stage was set, and the players were ready. What happened next would leave everyone questioning whether winning a battle was worth losing the war. The battle over the old oak tree quickly escalated into something much bigger than anyone had anticipated. What started as a simple disagreement between Sam and Karen soon turned into a full-blown neighborhood drama, dividing loyalties and stirring up emotions that had long been buried beneath the surface. Sam wasn't ready to give up without a fight. He knew how important the tree was, not just to him but to the entire community. So he did what he could to rally support. He knocked on doors, talked to neighbors, and even organized a small gathering in his backyard to discuss the issue. He brought photos of the tree through the seasons, showing its vibrant green leaves in summer, its golden hues in autumn, and the cozy shade it provided during scorching afternoons. He also shared stories from older residents who remembered playing under the tree when they were children. But despite his efforts, Sam found it hard to sway people. Many of his neighbors were hesitant to challenge Karen or the HOA. Some feared retaliation. Others simply didn't want to get involved. "It's just a tree," one neighbor said with a shrug. "If the HOA says it has to go, then maybe it's for the best." Others nodded along, unwilling to take a stand. Karen, on the other hand, was relentless. She saw an opportunity to solidify her position as the neighborhood's unofficial enforcer and seized it with both hands. Armed with printed flyers and carefully crafted talking points, she went door to door, spreading fear about the dangers of keeping the tree. She told horror stories about trees falling on houses during storms, crushing cars, and injuring people. She even showed pictures of damaged properties from other neighborhoods, insisting that the same fate awaited them if they didn't act now. Her tactics worked. Slowly but surely, more neighbors began siding with her. Some genuinely believed her warnings about safety hazards, while others just wanted the conflict to end so they could return to their peaceful lives. A few even admitted privately that they agreed with Karen all along. They just hadn't spoken up earlier because they didn't want to upset Sam. The tension reached a boiling point at the next HOA meeting. The room was packed with residents, eager to voice their opinions. Sam arrived early, clutching a folder filled with notes, research, and heartfelt appeals. He hoped to convince the board members to reconsider their decision by presenting logical arguments backed by facts. He explained that the tree was healthy and posed no immediate danger, citing advice from local arborists who had inspected it. He also pointed out that removing it would not only destroy decades of natural beauty, but also increase energy costs for nearby homes due to the loss of shade. Karen followed with her rebuttal, speaking with passion and conviction. She painted a vivid picture of potential disasters: branches crashing onto roofs, roots cracking sidewalks, and leaves clogging gutters. "We can't wait for tragedy to strike before we do something," she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. "This isn't just about my flowers, it's about protecting our families and our property." The debate grew heated, with voices overlapping and tempers flaring. Some attendees sided with Sam, praising the tree's historical significance and ecological benefits. Others supported Karen, echoing her concerns about safety and maintenance. For every argument Sam made, Karen countered with another, refusing to back down. As the meeting dragged on, it became clear that neither side was willing to compromise. Finally, the HOA president called for a vote. One by one, the board members cast their ballots. When the results were announced, Sam felt his heart sink. The majority had voted in favor of cutting down the tree. Outside the meeting hall, Sam stood silently, staring at the ground. His wife, Lisa, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You did everything you could." Sam nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of defeat. As they walked home together, he glanced at the oak tree standing proudly in their yard. It looked the same as always, strong, steady, and timeless, but he knew it wouldn't be there much longer. Word of the decision spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. By the time Sam and Lisa returned home, several neighbors had already gathered near the tree, murmuring amongst themselves. Some, expressed regret about the outcome while others seemed indifferent. Karen, however, was triumphant. She strolled confidently toward Sam, a smug smile plastered across her face. "I hope you understand this is for the greater good," she said, her tone dripping with superiority. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for progress." Sam clenched his fist but forced himself to stay calm. "Progress?" he replied bitterly. "Is that what you call destroying something that's been here longer than any of us? See, Karen, this isn't going to end well." Karen laughed dismissively and walked away, leaving Sam to stew in his frustration. That night, as he sat on his porch staring at the tree, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd underestimated just how far Karen would go to get her way. And deep down, a part of him wondered whether karma might eventually step in to balance the scales. Over the next few days, preparations began for the tree's removal. Notices were posted around the neighborhood, warning residents about the upcoming work. Sam avoided looking at them, focusing instead on spending as much time as possible under the tree's branches. He took pictures, collected fallen leaves as keepsakes, and even let his kids carve their initials into the trunk. One last memory before it was gone forever. Meanwhile, Karen busied herself preparing for the tree's absence. She bought new gardening tools, ordered exotic plants online, and dreamed of transforming her yard into a showpiece worthy of admiration. She imagined how impressed everyone would be once the tree was out of the way, envisioning compliments pouring in from neighbors and friends alike. But as fate would have it, things don't always go according to plan. Neither Sam nor Karen realized just how intertwined their fates, and the fate of the tree, had become. Little did they know, the events, set in motion by the HOA's decision, would lead to consequences neither of them could have predicted. The day the arborists arrived felt like a somber occasion, as if the entire neighborhood was mourning the loss of an old friend. Early in the morning, Sam woke up with a heavy heart. He stepped outside and stood silently beside the oak tree, running his fingers over its rough bark one last time. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but already he could hear the distant rumble of trucks pulling into the cul-de-sac. Their engines growled softly, breaking the quiet stillness of dawn. Lisa joined him after a while, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Sam without saying a word, knowing there wasn't much she could say to make this moment easier. Together they watched as the crew unloaded their equipment, chainsaws, ropes, helmets, and harnesses, all tools meant to dismantle something that had stood tall for over a century. It felt surreal, almost disrespectful seeing these machines set up around such a majestic piece of nature. Soon enough, curious neighbors began trickling out of their homes. Some came because they wanted to witness the event. Others couldn't resist the commotion. A few brought cameras or phones, snapping photos as though documenting history. There were whispers among them, some sympathetic toward Sam, others indifferent, and a handful openly supportive of Karen's stance. Karen herself appeared shortly after, wearing oversized sunglasses and a smug smile. She parked herself near her driveway, arms crossed, surveying the scene with satisfaction. Every now and then she exchanged words with the workers, nodding approvingly when they explained their plan to take down the tree safely. Her presence irritated Sam more than usual today, but he chose to ignore her, focusing instead on the task at hand. As the work began, the air grew tense. The first chainsaw roared to life, its sharp teeth biting into the ancient wood. The sound was jarring, a deafening whine that seemed to echo through every corner of the neighborhood. Sam flinched each time the blade cut deeper, feeling as though someone was carving away at his own memories. His kids stayed inside, unable to bear watching the destruction of the swing they loved so much. Lisa kept glancing at him, concern etched on her face, but Sam didn't move. He remained rooted to the spot, unwilling to look away until the bitter end. Neighbors who had gathered nearby reacted differently. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as chunks of the tree fell to the ground. Others gossiped quietly, speculating about what would happen next. "Do you think Sam will plant another tree?" one woman asked her husband. "Probably not," he replied. "Not after all this." A young boy, no older than 8, tugged at his mother's sleeve, and pointed to the fallen branches. "Why are they cutting it down?" he asked innocently. His mother hesitated before answering, unsure how to explain something so complicated to a child. "Sometimes adults disagree about things," she said finally. "And sometimes, even when we don't want to, we have to let go." Karen, meanwhile, basked in her victory. She strutted around the area, making comments to anyone within earshot. "Finally, some progress," she declared loudly. "It's about time we got rid of that eyesore." Her tone was confident, bordering on triumphant, but not everyone shared her enthusiasm. One elderly neighbor shot her a disapproving glance before turning away, muttering under his breath, "Shameful." By mid-morning, the once proud oak tree had been reduced to a pile of logs and sawdust. Its massive trunk lay split open, revealing rings that told stories of droughts, storms, and seasons past. For Sam, those rings represented milestones in his life: the year he graduated high school, the birth of his children, the summers spent laughing beneath its shade. Now they were nothing more than fragments scattered across his yard. The workers packed up their gear and drove off, leaving behind an empty space where the tree used to stand. The sudden absence was startling. Without its towering presence, the landscape looked barren and incomplete. The sunlight poured directly onto Sam's house, unfiltered by leaves, and the wind swept through without obstruction. It was a stark reminder of what had been lost. Sam stared at the stump for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened. He thought about fighting harder, appealing to higher authorities, or staging protests. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't change anything. The HOA had spoken and the tree was gone. All he could do now was pick up the pieces and move forward. As he turned to head back inside, Karen approached him, her expression smug but tinged with mock sympathy. "I know it's hard to say goodbye," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "But trust me, you'll thank me later. Your property value will skyrocket without that monstrosity blocking the view." Sam clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, he met her gaze steadily and replied, "You might think you've won, Karen, but mark my words, you haven't seen the last of this story." His tone was calm but firm, carrying an undertone of warning that made Karen pause for a moment. She quickly recovered, however, waving dismissively as she walked away. "We'll see," she muttered under her breath. That night, Sam sat alone on his porch, staring at the dark silhouette of the stump illuminated faintly by the streetlights. He replayed the day's events in his mind, wondering if there was anything else he could have done. Lisa joined him eventually, sitting quietly beside him. After a while, she spoke gently. "Maybe this isn't the end," she said. "Maybe something good will come out of this. You never know." Sam nodded slowly, appreciating her optimism even though he struggled to feel hopeful. Still, her words planted a seed of possibility in his mind. Perhaps the tree's legacy wasn't entirely gone. It lived on in the lessons it taught, the memories it created, and the bonds it strengthened between people. And perhaps, just perhaps, karma had a way of balancing things out in ways no one expected. Little did Sam, or Karen, realize that their lives were about to intersect again in ways neither of them could foresee. The storm clouds gathering on the horizon weren't just meteorological. They symbolized the turbulence ahead, promising twists and turns that would leave the entire neighborhood reeling. Days turned into weeks after the old oak tree was cut down, and life in the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The empty space where the tree once stood became a constant reminder of what had been lost, but most people tried not to dwell on it. Sam and his family did their best to adjust, though they couldn't help glancing at the barren patch of ground whenever they stepped outside. It felt strange, almost unnatural, to see sunlight streaming directly into their yard, without the familiar filter of leaves. Karen, on the other hand, wasted no time celebrating her victory. She immediately began transforming her garden, planting exotic flowers and installing decorative lights that cast a soft glow over her prized flower beds. Every morning, she watered her plants with meticulous care, admiring how much brighter and more vibrant everything looked now that the monster tree was gone. Her neighbors noticed her newfound enthusiasm, though few shared her excitement. Some rolled their eyes when she wasn't looking, while others simply avoided engaging with her altogether. But nature has a way of reminding us that we don't always have the final say. Just as Karen started settling into her post-tree reality, the weather took an unexpected turn. A storm system brewing hundreds of miles away began creeping closer to the area, bringing with it dark clouds, gusty winds, and heavy rain. At first, no one paid much attention. It was still early in the season for severe weather, and forecasts predicted only minor disruptions. But as the days passed, meteorologists grew increasingly alarmed. This wasn't going to be just another spring shower. It was shaping up to be a powerful storm capable of causing real damage. Sam heard about the approaching weather on the local news one evening. He watched intently as the reporter described the storm's trajectory, pointing out areas likely to experience the worst conditions. When the map zoomed in on their neighborhood, Sam felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the situation felt eerily symbolic, almost like the universe was preparing to deliver a message. The next morning, the sky was unusually overcast, painted in shades of gray and black. Strong winds whipped through the streets, sending trash cans tumbling and scattering leaves across lawns. Neighbors hurriedly secured loose items in their yards, bracing for the worst. Sam spent the day reinforcing his garage door and checking the gutters, all while stealing glances at the stump left behind by the oak tree. Without its protective canopy, he worried about how vulnerable his property might be during the storm. Karen, too prepared for the incoming weather, but in her own way. Confident that her troubles were behind her now that the tree was gone, she focused on safeguarding her precious garden. She covered her delicate flowers with tarps and moved potted plants indoors, determined to protect her hard work from any potential harm. As she worked, she muttered under her breath about how inconvenient storms could be, oblivious to the irony of her complaints. By late afternoon, the storm hit with full force. Lightning illuminated the sky in jagged bursts, followed by deafening claps of thunder. Rain poured down in sheets, flooding streets and drenching anyone unlucky enough to be caught outside. The wind howled relentlessly, rattling windows and bending trees until their branches snapped under the pressure. Power lines swayed dangerously and transformers exploded in flashes of light, plunging parts of the neighborhood into darkness. Amidst the chaos, Sam huddled inside with Lisa and the kids, listening to the storm rage around them. They stayed, close to the center of the house, far from windows, as debris flew past outside. The sound of crashing wood echoed through the neighborhood, making everyone uneasy. Despite the danger, Sam couldn't shake the thought that something significant was happening, not just to him, but to the entire community. Karen sat alone in her living room, nervously sipping tea as she watched the storm unfold through her window. She had always hated bad weather, finding it messy and disruptive, but tonight she felt particularly anxious. Maybe it was the eerie silence between thunderclaps or the way the wind seemed to scream louder than usual. Whatever it was, it made her skin crawl. Then came the noise, a loud, ominous creak that sent shivers down her spine. At first, she thought it was coming from her roof, perhaps a loose shingle being torn away by the wind. But as the sound grew, louder and closer, she realized it was something else entirely. Before she could react, there was a deafening crash, followed by the unmistakable shattering of glass. Heart pounding, Karen rushed to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside, her slippers squelching in the wet grass. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Half of her roof had collapsed, crushed beneath the weight of something. As the beam of her flashlight swept over the debris, she gasped in horror. It was the stump, the very same stump left behind when the oak tree was cut down. The storm's ferocious winds had ripped it from the ground, sending it hurtling through the air like a missile before it landed squarely on her house. For a moment, Karen stood frozen, unable to process what had happened. How could this be possible? She had fought so hard to get rid of the tree, convinced it was a hazard. And yet here she was, standing in front of the wreckage caused by the very thing she had insisted must go. The irony was almost too much to bear. Neighbors quickly gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Some held umbrellas, shielding themselves from the relentless rain, while others peered curiously at the scene unfolding before them. Whispers spread rapidly as people pieced together what had occurred. "Did you hear? The stump fell on Karen's house," one man exclaimed to another. "Talk about karma," someone else muttered quietly. Sam arrived shortly after, having heard the crash from his own home. He approached cautiously, unsure whether to feel sorry for Karen or amused by the poetic justice of it all. When he saw the extent of the damage, however, sympathy won out. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer despite the driving rain. Karen turned to face him, her expression a mix of shock, anger, and embarrassment. "This is your fault," she snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "If you hadn't let them cut down that stupid tree, none of this would have happened." Sam raised an eyebrow, incredulous. "My fault? You're the one who pushed for the tree to be removed in the first place. Don't blame me for the consequences of your own decisions." His words stung, but deep down Karen knew he was right. Still, admitting it aloud was unthinkable. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly and looked away, muttering something unintelligible under her breath. As emergency responders arrived to assess the situation, the crowd dispersed, leaving Karen to deal with the aftermath. Her perfect garden was trampled, her roof was ruined, and her sense of triumph had been replaced by a bitter taste of humility. Meanwhile, Sam returned home, shaken but thoughtful. Watching the events unfold had reinforced his belief that sometimes nature has a way of teaching lessons we didn't even realize we needed to learn. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind flooded streets, broken fences, and scattered debris. For Karen, the physical damage was just the beginning. The emotional toll of the night's events would linger long after the cleanup crews finished their work. And for Sam, the experience served as a reminder that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's also about learning to adapt and grow stronger, even when things don't go according to plan. Little did either of them know, the fallout from that fateful night was only the beginning. The neighborhood and their relationship would never be quite the same again. The morning after the storm brought an eerie calm to the neighborhood. The sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped, and the wind had died down to a gentle breeze. Puddles glistened in the sunlight that managed to peek through the clouds, reflecting the quiet chaos left behind. Broken branches littered the streets, power lines sagged precariously, and some houses showed visible signs of damage. Shattered windows, dented roofs, and torn shingles. But nothing compared to the scene at Karen's house. Karen woke up groggily, her head pounding from lack of sleep and the stress of the previous night. She stumbled out of bed, stepping carefully around shattered glass and splintered wood scattered across her living room floor. Her once pristine home now looked like a disaster zone. Furniture was overturned, water dripped steadily from the gaping hole in her roof, and mud streaked the carpet where the stump had crashed through. It was hard to believe this was the same house she'd spent so much time perfecting just days earlier. She wrapped herself in a robe and stepped outside, squinting against the bright light. Neighbors were already out and about, assessing the damage and helping each other clean up. Some offered hesitant smiles as they passed by, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Karen felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced before. She wasn't used to being on the receiving end of pity, or worse, judgment. Insurance adjusters arrived shortly after, clipboard in hand, ready to document the destruction. They examined the broken roof, snapped photos of the offending stump, and asked Karen questions about what had happened. At first, she tried to downplay her role in the incident, blaming the storm for being unusually severe. But when one of the adjusters pointed out that the stump might have been dislodged due to improper removal techniques, Karen's face flushed red with embarrassment. "It's not my fault," she insisted, her voice rising defensively. "I didn't cut it down. I just wanted it gone." The adjuster nodded sympathetically but explained that insurance coverage might be limited since the accident stemmed from human intervention rather than purely natural causes. You may need to consult with the contractor who removed the tree, he said diplomatically. This kind of thing can happen if the roots aren't properly dealt with. Karen clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had fought tooth and nail to get rid of the tree, only for its remains to come back and haunt her in the most literal way possible. As the adjusters continued their inspection, she retreated inside, pacing furiously and replaying the events of the past few weeks in her mind. Had she pushed too hard? Was she wrong to demand the tree's removal? These thoughts gnawed at her, though she refused to admit them aloud. Meanwhile, Sam and his family were busy cleaning up their own yard. Though their property hadn't suffered major damage, the absence of the oak tree made them more vulnerable to the storm's effects. Water pooled in areas that used to stay dry thanks to the tree's shade, and loose debris cluttered their driveway. Despite the extra work, there was a strange sense of solidarity among the neighbors. People chatted as they worked, sharing stories of close calls and minor miracles. A few even laughed about how ironic it was that Karen's prized garden had ended up buried under half a roof. Sam couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that his family had escaped unscathed. On the other, he couldn't ignore the bittersweet irony of the situation. Part of him wished Karen had never meddled with the tree in the first place, but another part hoped this experience would teach her, and everyone else, a valuable lesson about respecting nature. He knew it wasn't healthy to dwell on schadenfreude, so he focused instead on rebuilding and moving forward. Later that afternoon, Lisa suggested planting new trees to replace the old oak. "It won't be the same, obviously," she said gently, "but it's a start. Maybe we can involve the whole neighborhood this time." Sam liked the idea. It felt proactive, hopeful even. Together, they began researching fast-growing species that could provide shade and beauty without posing significant risks. By evening, they had drafted a proposal to present to the HOA, hoping to encourage a more collaborative approach to landscaping in the future. Word of the proposal spread quickly, sparking conversations throughout the neighborhood. Many residents were eager to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to heal divisions and foster unity. Others remained skeptical, worried about potential costs or conflicts with the HOA. Still, the general mood was one of cautious optimism. Even those who hadn't been particularly fond of the old tree admitted that losing it had left a void, one that needed filling. Karen, however, was less enthusiastic. She spent most of the day on the phone with contractors, insurance agents, and anyone else she thought might help resolve her predicament. Each call ended in disappointment, leaving her increasingly isolated and bitter. When Sam knocked on her door later that evening, she opened it reluctantly, expecting another lecture. Instead, he greeted her with surprising kindness. "Hey, Karen," he said, holding out a small potted sapling. "I know things are tough right now, but I thought maybe you'd want to start fresh. This is a dogwood. It doesn't grow too big, and it blooms beautifully in the spring." For a moment, Karen stared at the plant, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to reject the gesture outright, but something about Sam's sincerity softened her defenses. Finally, she sighed and took the sapling, mumbling a quiet, "Thank you," before closing the door. That night, as she sat alone amidst the wreckage of her home, Karen found herself reflecting on everything that had led to this point. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent obsessing over the tree, the arguments she'd picked with Sam, and the lengths she'd gone to ensure its removal. In hindsight, it all seemed so petty, so unnecessary. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. The next morning, Karen joined a group of neighbors who were clearing debris from the streets. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of a change within her. Over the following weeks, she gradually distanced herself from the HOA drama, focusing instead on repairing relationships with those around her. She even pitched in to help plant new trees, earning tentative smiles and nods of approval from people she'd alienated before. Sam watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. While he doubted Karen would ever fully redeem herself, he appreciated her efforts to make amends. More importantly, he saw how the storm and its aftermath had brought the community closer together. Conversations that once revolved around complaints and grievances now centered on collaboration and mutual support. As the days turned into months, the neighborhood began to transform. Saplings sprouted in empty spaces, their tender leaves promising growth and renewal. Though none of them could replace the grandeur of the old oak tree, they symbolized something equally important: resilience, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. And deep down, Sam hoped that Karen and everyone else had learned to appreciate the delicate balance between progress and preservation. Little did they realize, however, that the lessons of the storm weren't confined to their immediate surroundings. Nature had spoken loud and clear, reminding them that life is unpredictable and often cyclical. What happens next depends not on controlling the uncontrollable, but on adapting and finding harmony within the chaos.